All right, and welcome to the 31st episode of the Online Network of Independent Learning Professionals, and it went so quickly. Today we are speaking with Rob, and let me know if I'm saying your last name right, Foshay?
That's correct.
Awesome. So Rob Foshay, and we're going to be talking about ADDIE, or Agile Design and Development. And just like always, if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, feel free to put them in chat. Rob, don't feel like you have to monitor that. I will keep track of all of it. We will have a Q&A at the end, a lively discussion. We've got a panel for today who can also weigh in. Great. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob. Maybe if you tell us a little bit about yourself and, you know, just what you're doing, what you're up to, and then we'd love to chat about ADDIE, or Agile Design and Development.
That's great. Good. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. A little bit about myself. I've been in the instructional design field for close to 40 years now. Did my doctoral work at Indiana University back when the earth was cooling, and in instructional design, and have worked in universities, spent 35 years in a string of e-learning companies, serving both the training industry and the K-12, excuse me, and so on. And recently, I've been consulting, and I also have faculty appointments at 2 universities where I'm mentoring doctoral students in education technology as they work on their dissertations. And so that's a kind of a quick overview. This is a presentation that my co-author, Ken Silber, and I developed on this question as part of in support actually of a textbook that that was published in, I believe, 2003 that we wrote, and a textbook on instructional design, or actually it's on instructional strategies. At the time, there was not an accessible textbook on instructional strategies. And since that time, I've gone on to edit a couple of other books on instructional design, and published, I don't know, something upwards of 70 or 80 journal articles and book chapters in various aspects of the topic. So that's kind of the quick overview. My personal website, by the way, is www.foshay.org, and there you can get additional information on publications and other kinds of things that I do. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. The debate between ADDIE and Agile really goes back to, or really hit hard in the 1990s. That was when there was a period when a number of publications criticized ADDIE, and at that point there were many limitations, or obvious limitations, that had emerged as people used ADDIE over the previous really 30 years. ADDIE got started in the 1960s, and during that period of time, other fields, most notably programming, but also other fields, developed an alternative methodology, generically called Agile Design, although there are lots of specific variations of that for various fields. And it represents a kind of a change in thinking about what design is and the distinction between design and project management. So let's talk a little bit, first of all, about what ADDIE is. And there's the familiar waterfall model, which you know and love, and that's what you were trained in probably. And the question, the issue with this is that with the ADDIE model is that it's really based on some assumptions that have been challenged. First of all, one criticism is that it takes instructional design as an algorithmic procedure. This criticism comes from the early models that were developed in the 1970s and 80s by the military and subsequently by some large corporations such as the Bell System and Arthur Andersen. And the objective or the assumption was that if only you had the right procedure, then high quality training would emerge. Another criticism of of the ADDIE model is that it assumes perfect information and invariant conditions. In other words, it assumes you know everything there is to know about the project at the beginning. And it assumes that nothing will change while the project is underway. And in point of fact, if you think about it for a second, if there are changes in the conditions or while the project is underway, you treat that as noise or change of scope, and change of scope is to be avoided as much as possible because it runs up the cost of the project and also increases the risk of the project. Another criticism, a little more subtle, is what it really does is to confound the workflow and the design process. The workflow is really project management. The design process, is how you think about the decisions you make in design. And there is no, in the classic representations of ADDIE, there's no distinction between the two. And that's another criticism of ADDIE. It also, therefore, implicitly assumes that instructional design is a well-structured problem. In other words, the properties of a well-structured problem are like this. If you look at the left-hand column there, in other words, what we're doing is assuming that the beginning state of the problem is well-defined. We're assuming that the actions you take in response to that problem are well-defined. The end state is well-defined, and the constraints are well-defined. And if all those things are true, then the ADDIE project will go just fine. The instructional design process will go just fine, and so on. If there is a change, or if those conditions are not true, then ADDIE starts getting very risky. And it starts, once again, that's when you get into change of scope. That's when you get into substituting a guess for data, and so on. Contrast that with moderately structured problems such as troubleshooting, and with ill-structured problem solving. Let's take a look, first of all, at the ill-structured problem solving box column over on the right. First of all, the beginning state is not clear and it's not spelled out. Secondly, the actions that you take in order to solve the problem are not clear or spelled out at the beginning of the project. Thirdly, you don't know what the end state is. You don't know what a solution would look like when you start a project. And fourthly, lots of times the constraints on the project are not clear and they're not well known. Well, the argument is that instructional design projects, most of the time, many instructional design projects are a lot closer to the ill-structured problem-solving end of the scale than the well-structured end of the scale. And if you have a project which is ill-structured, then by its nature, and you attempt to use the ADDIE model, then that's when risk goes through the roof. That's when you get change of scope. That's when you get misunderstandings, and projects fail. So we have to do something different. This is not an unusual circumstance, by the way, for design projects in general. Similar things have been found in other kinds of design, most notably programming, but also architecture as examples, and some kinds of media design use this kind of discipline, and so on. So in other words, the argument is that there is a generalizable discipline of design, which is sort of a meta argument, if you will, or a meta discipline that can be applied to lots of fields, not just instructional design. So let's take a look at that definition. Here's one. Design is a disciplined inquiry engaged in for the purpose of creating some new thing of practical utility. It involves exploring an ill-defined problem, finding as well as solving the problem, and specifying ways to effect change. And then once again, it applies to a whole bunch of fields. As I said, architecture. There are examples of this in architecture, engineering, industrial design, software, and increasingly instructional design. When you see articles that talk about design science or the science of design as a generalizable thing, that's what they're talking about. If you see those terms used in the context of instructional design, then that's when you're talking about probably something like Agile, some variation on Agile as a discipline. So how does ADDIE work as a kind of design? ADDIE, as experts do it, and again, not novices, but experts, is a problem-solving process, not a procedure. It is made up of a thinking process and a set of underlying principles. In other words, instructional design is a way of thinking about a problem. It is not a procedure. The thinking process is similar to the ones designers use in other fields, and instructional design is a well-known and agreed-upon set of principles and heuristics that form the mental model for expert designers. In other words, these are not procedures, these are decision-making principles. And that's really the core knowledge of what instructional design is. This in turn then leads to a discussion of 5 levels of expertise in design problem solving. First, as you start as a novice, you tend to follow strict rules as laid down probably from whatever training you've got. So you tend to start out procedurally, in other words, strict rules. Beginner is moved on slightly and is more sensitive to the situation and context and more aware of exceptions to the rules. And this typically happens with experience. As you get to be more of a competent problem solver, more of an experienced instructional designer, then you work in a substantially different way, being much more selective as to which problem features to attend to, and you have a much more clearly articulated plan of working. In other words, you know what to pay attention to, you know what not to pay attention to, you know how to get the information you need, and so on. And then the expert recognizes the nature of the situation intuitively and performs actions without the need for conscious mental effort. In other words, what an expert will do is to approach it as an ill-structured problem and will make the decisions to define or put boundaries around the problem first. And that is the fundamental difference. A novice assumes the problem has been defined. An expert assumes the problem has not been defined. So that in turn then means that instructional design is a mixed problem. A fully conceived training development project has tasks at all 5 levels of expertise. In other words, all 5 kinds of things are going on simultaneously in a training development project. But the essential design problem is ill-structured and required expertise. That has huge implications in terms of project management, staffing, the way in which you define a project, the way in which you work with clients, how you define project milestones, budgeting, everything. So this is a very different way of thinking about what a project is. So let's talk a little bit about project management then, as opposed to the design process. If we separate out those two, then project management is a highly developed, standardized, and validated approach that allows people managing projects in disparate fields to approach complex management issues involved in a way that is both systematic and effective. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. In point of fact, the core skill of project management is not scheduling and budgeting and managing workflow, it is risk management. And there are lots of sources of risk in a project. First of all, the risks are different if you have a single project versus multiple projects. that you're managing simultaneously and your team is working on simultaneously. The risks are different if you have intact work teams versus shared resources. If the project has known duration versus variable duration. If it's emergent work, in other words, you don't really, in other words, not very much is defined about the project, that drives risk up. If there are new technologies or tools involved, and if the project size or priority or importance is different from what you're used to and your team is used to, then that's a problem. That's a source of risk. So what a project manager is doing is assessing these risks, developing plans to manage these risks, including alternatives. And that's really what project management is all about. The planning and the budgeting and the scheduling and the and the workflow management and all that stuff, that's minor. That's the procedural part of project management. That's not what project management is. Project management, the argument is that project management is essentially risk management. Here's a visualization of what a project looks like. This comes out of the project management literature. So you can see there are sort of three cycles in the project: a study period, an implementation period, and an operations period. And then within that, you see activities and so on. But within those, once again, the thing I don't like about this is that, once again, this is a linear representation of a project, and that's dangerous. Can be misleading. But there are budget aspects, there are business aspects, and there are technical aspects of each one of these. And so that's kind of the way a project workflow works. That's different from what a project manager does. However, a project manager does these things. So control of the project, identifying, managing risks, and so on, all of the rest of the things that you see there. This is really what project leadership is all about. Well, I prefer the term project leadership to project management. This is really what's going on. And when you put the two together, this is how it works. So the project leadership and all those tasks that project leaders perform then fit together or create the conditions under which the project itself can proceed. And of course, the underlying principles are principles of communication and teamwork, naturally. And it all has to happen in a climate of organizational commitment. So this is, I think, a useful way of thinking about projects. It is relatively new. The Dobson preparation, or the Dobson citation is, or the Forsberg citation is 2005, and so on. So here we go. So let's compare the two now as to what you do. There are sort of three kinds of development models that we talk about. There's the waterfall model, but you can also think of workflow as a spiral, and you can think of it as a V. All three are appropriate under some specific circumstances. This is a key point. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's that you choose the appropriate method based on what you know and do not know about the project. The counter argument is that if you only choose one of these all the time, then you will inevitably make incorrect assumptions about the nature of the project, and you will drive project risk through the roof. So you can see then how this breaks out in terms of development method. It can be unified or it can be incremental. The secondary development method can be linear or evolutionary, either way, and the delivery method can be single or multiple. So the point is that you can do all of these. I think the ones over on the right probably lend themselves more to spirals and V's. The ones on the left tend to lend themselves more to waterfall. But even that isn't necessarily true. let's talk a little bit about this idea of evolutionary development. The point of an evolutionary development cycle, which is what Agile is that since you do not know the opening conditions of a project, and since you do not know what the solution will look like at the beginning, therefore, you need to discover those things, and the primary task of problem solving or doing the project is to define those things first. Once you have defined them or discovered them, if you will, then and only then can you go ahead and build the project. So it works well when the requirements are uncertain, when you might end up pursuing opportunities or alternate concepts, or when you have lots of business risks, opportunities or threats to consider. In other words, the less is known about the project at the beginning, the stronger some kind of an agile model is going to be. And so what's the difference then in how workflow works in an agile model?
And Rob, we have one quick question since it kind of is pertinent. It was on a slide, I think, before this, or maybe one back. But it was the word V-E-E. And so we're getting asked, like, what, can we get a definition for that? What is that exactly?
Oh, okay. A V project flow means that things that would normally work in sequence in an agile model work in parallel. And they come together at the end. And the point of the next slide here, that one kind of shows how workflow works in an agile model. And so what the point here is, this is an example of a V model. So what you would do would be to start out on the left by figuring out what you know and what you don't know. You then have tasks proceeding in parallel and communicating with each other, and you can see that the workflow has implicit in it a fair amount of iteration as well, and so on. And then gradually you converge on a solution at the end. So does that help?
That does help. And one other question about this specific slide, and John, let me know if you have any other questions piggybacking on the V. Kendra is asking, what are the numbers and lowercase letters for?
Oh, those are relevant. Those are relevant to the specific article, and they're not relevant to our discussion. So you can just ignore those.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit more about how risk management works. Once again, the point here being that risk management is the thing that really drives the discussion of project management. This is one way of thinking about risks. You can categorize risks as catastrophic, critical, moderate, minor. You can also categorize each kind of risk as high, medium, or low. And a good project manager will go through this thought process in a very disciplined way, and will make decisions about in advance, create contingency plans or take actions in order to minimize risk in a project, according to the project manager's assessment of these risks. So how does that work? Well, it works something like this. There are lots of strategies you can use: avoidance, transfer, mitigation, exploitation, enhancement, sharing, acceptance, or you can just be passive, not do anything. And so lots of possibilities here. The strategy, not all these strategies completely eliminate risk, note, but they can optimize or minimize risk or mitigate risk. And the point here is, therefore, that risk management in project management is not a yes or no thing. You cannot, there's no such thing as a project with no risk. What you can do, however, is to optimize. so that you have optimized the probability of success of the project. You have minimized risk, the probabilities of risk, depending on your assessment of what kinds of risks there are. And again, lots of different possibilities. So the benefits here, if you do risk management properly, better effectiveness, better project focus, reduced cost and time, better risk management, rapid and iterative delivery, increased agility, dealing with rapid change, increased innovation. These are the benefits of Agile, if done properly and if done appropriately in a project. And if you, that's why, so again, I would argue the less well-defined the project is, the more likely you are to need an Agile method of some kind. And the reason you will choose it is because because your assessment is that an Agile method will produce these benefits when compared to what you would do with an ADDIE method. But, so how does this work in practice? Well, it's not the same as a conventional ID project. You've got different kinds of team structures, which means the people involved have to know how to work on those teams. Different kinds of workflows and project plans. By the way, Microsoft Project is profoundly misleading. If you try to model an ADDIE kind of or a Agile kind of a project in Microsoft Project, it will cause you to make mistakes. It will cause, Microsoft Project is designed for linear projects only. And you really can't, it'll drive you nuts if you try to really model an Agile project. Lots of different roles, lots of tasks, lots of competencies required that are different. So this is not something you can just step into. Relationship with the client, incremental project contracting and budgeting is recommended. Because you cannot define the project at the beginning, and you do not make the assumption that you know what the project is going to be at the beginning, a fixed price contract is very high risk, both for the client and for you if you're a contractor. Therefore, the recommendation always is to try to talk the client into an incremental contract. Go through a definition stage or perhaps, and then go from definition to prototyping, and then do some testing, do user-centered design, another commonly used term, and so on. This requires a level of trust and a level of cooperation and a level of involvement with clients that oftentimes is not seen in ADDIE projects. So the client mentality has to be there as well. And that's the next point. The support, the intimacy, the intimate relationship with the client is absolutely critical. Another point is this is a life cycle relationship. This is not something where you build the project and you deliver it and it's done. This is something where you are involved with the project and the project matures over time. The good news side of that is that typically you will wind up delivering a prototype or a first version of the project earlier than you would in an ADDIE model. That's the good news part, and therefore the client's confidence that the project is on track will improve. The bad news part of it is that that's just the first version, and you go through multiple versions over the life cycle of the project. So it's a life cycle relationship, not a buy and sell contract relationship. Other kinds of, so where do you go to get information about all this? There's a series of 3 handbooks on published by ISPI and Wiley Pfeiffer. I edited the one on instructional design. There are another one on HPT interventions. There's another one on performance measurement. This slideshow is pretty much drawn from the instructional design one, the middle one. But that's a really good source of information as well on all of this. There's of course a ton of literature on design as a discipline and design as applied to instructional design. There's also a ton of of literature on project management as a field, and you can get certified in that as well. So lots and lots to know, lots of things to do, and that's it. So can we go to questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. That was a lot of great information, and it's definitely a topic that we've not really explored as a group before, so that's really, really helpful. And I also just wanted to mention that we have a panel today. So if you want, Rob, you can go ahead and hit stop share. It's probably at the top of your screen, if I had to guess. And then we can see everyone full screen. Perfect.
There we
So
go.
today on the, thank you. So today on the panel, we've got Lita, Sean, Dennis, and Carrie. And then I also just wanted to give a little shout out to Kendra for putting me in touch with you. So this wouldn't have happened but for her. So I just wanted to go ahead and just throw it out there. If anybody has any questions off the bat or comments about project design, maybe, you know, what is your preferred, you know, design process? Why do you use it? Do you use a mix? So I'll start with people on the panel first. So Carrie, Dennis, Sean, or Lita, do you guys have any thoughts or questions first off? I don't think, Carrie shook her head no. Dennis, it looks like you unmuted. Did you have something?
Probably ask a question. Generally, you've really covered it all, Rob. It's pretty good what you've covered there, so thanks. My only question really would be what we didn't really see in your presentation had to do with project reporting. What types of tools are your preferred tools for project reporting?
Well, typically in an agile kind of a model, the philosophy is rapid prototyping and early user trial, early learner involvement in decision making. So design becomes a shared task or a shared process involving both the users and the designer, working together typically in focus groups or whatever. And so in that kind of a case, each prototype trial becomes a milestone, and it becomes possible for all to see, both the client and the team, to see where you are in your thinking about the design process.
When you are providing reports, let's say that a project is running amok in one or two areas, are you providing within a report? Within that report, are you providing alternate paths or a resolution?
Sure, that's a risk issue, and what that says, and you know, any project report should include a status assessment on project risk and plans for managing risk, and that's dynamic, so it changes over time, and so you do it as you wish. And you say, okay, this risk has reared its ugly head. The original project plan identified this risk and said that this is how we were going to handle it, and so this is how we're going to handle it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis and Rob. And we had a question kind of a little bit in line with that from Kendra. You know, I saw prototyping somewhere, but she was asking, like, how often do you prototype? You know, is there a set standard on how often, you know, you prototype?
No, there's no standard. The simple answer is early and often. I will, you know, in an Agile project, it's not unusual to start out with a group of end users and as much whiteboard space as you can get, and start sketching ideas out right away. And you interact with users by rapid prototyping that way, just on the whiteboard, and then go from there. And things gradually get more and more sophisticated.
Yeah. And there's so many good like videos and things about how to do that. I mean, even software developers where they literally, you know, they'll take like a piece of paper and like sketch out like how the user interface is going to look, and then ask users to click where they would, and then kind of see how it goes. I mean, there's just so many cool, really low cost, simple ways to do that.
Right. Yeah. Keep it simple. The tools. I wish there were better rapid prototyping tools specifically for instructional design tasks, but there aren't, or for e-learning, but there aren't. But a lot of the more general purpose ones for software design can be adapted.
Yeah, and there is one that I wanted to mention to the group, just in case they've not seen it before, but it's called Branch Track. And if you've not seen Branch Track, it's basically, I mean, a lot of the tools that we currently use, Storyline, Captivate, things like that, when you get into really intricate branching scenarios that get, if they select this option, they say this, then we want it to go here, and it really goes down a rabbit hole, it can get a little overwhelming in our normal content authoring tools, but Branch Track really gives you a really good high-level overview, and it's free to try. So I just wanted to mention that to you guys. That's something I've been playing around with.
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, that's a great example, and I wish, I wish Captivate and Storyline had better rapid prototyping tools in it than they do.
Yeah, and the other thing about Branch Track is it really is rapid. I mean, you can build a very intricate prototype of scenarios that go so deep in like an hour. So very cool. Sean has a question, so I'm going to turn it over to Sean for a moment.
Yeah, hi guys. I suppose, just really a comment around how ADDIE kind of fits into Agile and even Sam, I suppose. I kind of think, I mean, I personally kind of am a big fan of ADDIE in terms of what we do, but I also am a big fan of design thinking and kind of merge the two, if you like. And I'd just love to hear your thoughts around ADDIE. I know sometimes gets a bad rep as being a very waterfall focused and linear kind of process. And yeah, I just love to hear people's thoughts. I really don't see it that way, and see it much more as a iterative process. That even within each of the stages of ADDIE, for example, the design stage, you can prototype and you can, even follow a SAM type methodology because it's so large. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to see what other people kind of thought about that, or is that not seen as being the way?
Any thoughts about that?
Rob, first, maybe in terms of equating kind of to the waterfall model.
The classical representations of ADDIE, again, going back to the Air Force manual in the 1970s and some of the early corporate manuals and so on, the representations of workflow are pretty linear. I think I would agree that one of the things that happens early on, is that designers came to the principle of successive approximation. Merrill published a famous article 30 years ago now called, in which he called this the pebble in the pond model. And recently, Andy Gibbons has been influenced, or has been influenced by the design process and architecture, which is a lot closer to Agile, and talks about layers of design as well. And so that's another way of thinking about it. The thing about ADDIE that gets you in trouble is if you treat ADDIE as, okay, I've done this task and now it's done and I don't need to go back and do it again. That's linear that's linear workflow, and it works only if the degree of uncertainty in the project is low and you know everything about the project up front. If that's true, then ADDIE will work just fine and it's very efficient. If it's not true, then maybe you need to do something else. I have worked on large-scale development projects, multi-million-dollar development projects, in which what we did was to use an Agile process for the first few modules, of the project, to define the overall scope of the project, to define the structure, to develop prototypes and models and so on. And then we built an assembly line. Lots of tools, lots of templates from the tool set that we had, and so on. And cranking out the rest of those modules then became a very, very much an ADDIE-like kind of a process, because we had figured out what our solutions were going to be.
Does that help, Sean?
Yeah, I think so. I think some of it is maybe how we label things and how we kind of perceive those different boxes. I very much, in a similar way, I've worked on a lot of large projects where each part of the ADDIE is, a few months, a few €100,000 type project in itself with a lot of people involved. So for looking at the analysis, for example, it could be a 6-month project where you're going through a lot of iterations, a lot of user feedback on what the needs are, assessments around competence gaps, and then really understanding what that need is through that kind of process. And once you've kind of figured out what the need is, then you want to go and design something, and then you go into again, design thinking or a more agile type design process, and build something out. I guess during your design process where you're actually building something out, you generally don't go back and try and re-find out the need. Of course, if you learn something new later, it can be implemented. But I guess you trust in the work that's been done. And I guess that's where I kind of see that difference in kind of practical terms, that you can't mash everything together. Like if you're making videos versus surveying to understand competence gaps, throwing it all into the one bucket and trying to do it in a cycle, I suppose, of continuous change, isn't really realistic, because instructional design is such a broad spectrum of work.
Yeah, one way of thinking about it is, one kind of a test is, if a change late in the process is undesirable. In other words, if it's going to result in a change of scope or a cost overrun or whatever, then you're using an ADDIE methodology of some kind. If the change is part of the design process and results in a refinement of the design, but is within scope for the project because of the way the project was defined at the beginning, and so on, then you're probably using some kind of an Agile model.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also interesting, even like when you're kicking off a project with a client and trying to understand like what is their process. I can remember just a quick story. When I started at Chipotle, everyone was brand new, and so there was no process. And when you have an entire team that was hired at the same time, and if I have in my mind how things are going to go and somebody else has in their mind, and we think like we all have a good grasp on it, and you're working through a project and things are just like falling all over the place and not working. One of the things that we did was literally went into a conference room, got a bunch of sticky notes, and laid out step by step how we each thought a project cycle should go, and to see, all of the gaps and misunderstandings and all of the, because you can literally visually see it, which is kind of what design thinking is really helpful with, is actually seeing something tangible that you can point to and say, wait, we're missing something here. Let's add another sticky note in there, or whatever. So no matter what process you use, that's really helpful. So just a suggestion. If you're working on any projects and really it's not going smoothly and you think it's because it's a process problem. We've got a few comments about the problem with Agile is, sometimes you get stuck on a project that just never ends. There does need, to sometimes be like a wrap up, You know, like here's the, you know, people, you know, a lot of times with projects, you know, you can end that and say, what are the lessons learned? And, you know, that's kind of like that big wrap up lesson, you know, at the end. But yeah.
Well, again, you know, that's partly, again, a matter of life cycle. And the question is, do you think you're building projects that get built and they're finished and they go on the shelf and you never touch them again? For the most part, that's not the world I live in. For the most part, the projects I live in, the projects that I've been in contact with, have maintenance cycles that go on for years. And ultimately we'll wind up spending more on maintenance than we did in creating it over the life cycle of the project. And so in that kind of a case, then it's not a matter of putting something on the shelf and forgetting about it. It's a matter of cycling back through it all the time. And that's a very different attitude, and it causes you to do things differently in design.
Yeah, and I also think that, you know, one of the things, you know, that we've done in the past is like have like a phase 2, you know, so we know what phase 1 is going to look like. These are the things that we're going to include. Then we can do like that, you know, meeting of like, okay, so what could we have done differently here? And then we know that phase 2 is slated. And then so you at least have them chunked into, so it's not like a never ending, you know, they fit in these buckets, but we know that we will be touching them again and maintaining them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Helena is asking about, you know, she's never used Agile, but, you know, would like more information on like how to understand how to actually do an Agile project. So this is a question for maybe anyone in the community or Rob or anyone. But, you know, if you've never used Agile, where might you go to learn a little bit more about how to actually execute that type?
Well, again, I would start with the ISPI handbooks that I mentioned. The one I edited on instructional design has a couple of relevant chapters, and that's a good place to start. There are now, you know, there's now quite a lot out there about Agile development in general, and certainly a ton of stuff in software development, to which you can sort of include by analogy, if you will. And there's an increasing amount of work in specific to instructional design and Agile as well.
So there you go, Helena.
Google
you know,
is your friend.
That's right. Google is your friend. Kendra is asking, and again, this is for anyone in the community, the panel, or Rob, you know, for prototyping, you know, what is a good number of people to get constructive feedback? And I think that's always a balance, because if you get, you know, so many people, it can be overwhelming, and there's a ton of, you know, feedback, but then you want to make sure all the stakeholders and everyone that down the line can say, hey, we should have done this, you know, that they were included. So does anybody have any thoughts about that?
My general rule of thumb is you probably want about 5 people in the room. But I also recognize that, you know, you need to have the stakeholders in the room. And so whoever, so it's always a compromise between those two.
I think that's very good advice. Sean, did you have something?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think it's good to get feedback from a wide audience. Oh, okay. I might be on
it's back.
Or Wi-Fi. Is it any better or no? Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say, recently I got some feedback from 100 people. It was in a university setting. And that was fantastic. But obviously you need a pretty good filtering mechanism to get through all the personal preferences. And the project, a different project we had, it was sent to 16 people to review one project, and they all sent their feedback back individually. So I would just say, really make sure you channel that, if you're working with clients in particular, back through like one person if you can, or 2 people, so that they can kind of decide themselves which feedback is taking precedence and things like that. That's some fresh experience just there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, having a point of contact. I mean, it is incredible the difference when you work on a project and people just dump a bunch of feedback from all different sources. Most of, well, all of my clients now, you know, it has to be consolidated feedback and through the one decision maker that they want to select. That way I'm not looking at, you know, 3 different pieces of feedback on one paragraph and they all say different things and I have no idea like which thing it should say, plus all the extra time that, you know, that I'm going to charge for that. You know, it's like, and then it's not even going to be as effective. So having a point of contact for the consolidated feedback, that's really important. Yeah,
that's my take as well. Myself, I never accept multiple feedbacks unless they're for completely different and relatively isolated tasks or roles within the project. So somebody, if I were doing a web development and learning within that, I would wind up with, in that case, typically 2 points of contact for feedback. And anybody else that emails me, I would simply forward those emails to that point of contact and ask them to put that into the, to merge that information in. Because I have had that where people have gone around their contact to get to me, and I've just back to them, and I'll CC that person as well. While the person who sent it to me, I'll CC them as well, keep them in the loop to remind them, this is your point of contact. This is the person who will feed me.
yeah, that's I've had that happen as well. They know that you're the person that's going to make the changes, so they just go around and say, hey, can you just go ahead and do this? And you do have to kind of politely, like, that sounds like, you know, that's really great, you know, helpful information. Let's loop in, you know, Sarah and, you know, get her thoughts on this to, you know, since you've got that's your point of contact for here. Yeah, and Christy had asked, you know, how do you same what kind of Dennis was saying, like, what are other ways that you might handle conflicting feedback from multiple sources? Has anybody else run into that where if you're not getting solid feedback, or maybe there's a squirrely project where you're getting conflict from multiple sources? Anybody had any experience with that?
All the time. Yeah, you can create an advisory panel. When you're in that situation, there are really a couple of issues to pay attention to. One is of course getting to a solution, recognizing that there is never an ideal solution. There are only optimum solutions, and so everyone has to understand that it's an optimization process, not a perfect solution process. That's the first issue. Second issue is that lots of times, if there are multiple stakeholders, there usually are multiple stakeholders for a project, they may represent interests that are not compatible. And that's not your problem, that's their problem. But you have to create some kind of an advisory panel or other mechanism for them to come to a consensus among themselves. The third thing you can do is, once again, exploit the virtues of a rapid prototyping process in order to get people to, in order to build consensus that you're going in the right direction on the project early on. And, I would go so far as to say, don't give them design documents. That's your jargon, that's not their jargon. Give them rapid prototypes and let them respond to the prototypes and say, if you're going in the right, if you like this, if you think we're going in the right direction, then say that. And lots of times you'll get better buy-in on the prototypes than you would on any abstraction or design process, design document rather.
Yeah, and kind of going along with that, I once worked on a project where the people that were the subject matter experts did not all agree on the process, and that's fun. When you've got like 15 people and they cannot come to a consensus, and so all the feedback that you get is conflicting because they do not all agree on the process. So, at that point I had a meeting and we just had a 2-hour meeting, and I would just list the item and say, this is what needs to, have a decision made, because they could not do it themselves. The optimum thing would be that you could send an email and say, you need to make a decision on these things, but they could not. And so we had a meeting and just hashed it out. And I, did my other work on the side, and it was like, all right, what did we decide on this one? And just went down the list. So it was a really fun day. All right. Well, we're basically at the top of the hour, and I just wanted to thank Rob for spending his hour with us today and preparing this presentation. And I know these things take a while, and we just really appreciate it. So chat love, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob.
And and again, a shout out to Kendra for suggesting that we chat, and so it would not have happened without her. So we really appreciate that. And thanks to the panel. Thanks, everyone. So we will go ahead and end, but we will see everyone next week, same time, same place. And until then, have a wonderful week.
Great.
Bye,
Thanks a lot for having
everybody.
me.
Bye, Rob.
Bye.
Thank you so much. It was a joy having you.
Bye.